Happy Monday afternoon, everybody. Thanks for checking into our latest Traded Black podcast presented by Dutchie. Good to have you on. I'm your host, Shad Dales. Big podcast here today. We're going to have Michael Bronstein coming up in just a moment. Talk about, the news from last week where that bill was filed in Pennsylvania. We want to learn what's next when it comes to adult use. I know some of you have reached out and asked, what can we expect and will adult use indeed pass? We'll get more of that information. But the big one here today, editor-in-chief from the Maine Wire, Steve Robinson, is going to join us in just a moment here at the top of the show. We're going to talk about everything that he had on his podcast with Tucker Carlson recently that talks about the Maine market and as many as 300 to 400 Chinese gang-related cannabis operations are going on. And most importantly, how a lot of local officials knew about this but remained quiet. Wow, to say the least. So with that, let's welcome in AV here on a Monday, who set this interview up. Well done. And should be a very interesting conversation because I was watching some of that podcast with Steve and Tucker and a lot of stuff that we kind of knew, but not that in depth. And it's an eye opener, is it not?
Yeah, definitely is. I mean, it plays into the narrative that you're kind of seeing from the administration on a national level, going after cartels, going after Chinese gangs, cleaning up on both sides of the aisle with the state-run cannabis industry as well as the hemp industry as it relates to bad actors, just unregulated product, and really legitimizing the plants. And this is step one. I watched the podcast and was kind of taken back. I mean, as to the level of detail and the scale as to what this is going on. And we've heard anecdotally that this was going on around the States, but this really brought it front and center.
Well, I like when you hear stories like this, especially as rumors of reform keep heating up. And this is the kind of stories that I think the government needs to know. And well done as we bring in our first guest here today, editor-in-chief from the Maine Wire, Steve Robinson. Good to meet you, sir. How are things?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me on, guys.
I really appreciate it. And I'll start things off real quick. If you had 60 seconds right now with the Attorney General of the United States of America, what would you say to them based on a lot of the stuff that you've learned? And we will get into details of that. But wow, what a story that you explained to Tucker Carlson last week. And there's a lot of information, a lot of stories, a lot of rumors that we learn here in the U.S. in various markets, but not to this extent. So if you had a chance to sit down with the federal government, what would your message be to them, Steve?
Well, I mean, 60 seconds with Pam Bondi, I would first say Epstein didn't kill himself, and then quickly segue into you've got to look at bank fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud. I think the ship has sailed on any kind of law enforcement attention span or voter attention span for purely cannabis related crimes. I think that the public, the American public, has kind of decided that cannabis really isn't the number one law enforcement issue that it maybe was in the 70s when Nixon was trying to lock up the hippies and the leftists. So the attention has moved on to the financial crimes, move on to the health risk. RFK Jr. is doing the Make America Healthy Again initiatives. Yep. You have to look at the unlicensed, unregistered, untested, untracked, totally unregulated marijuana that's being poisoned, I think, with Chinese fumigants and then passed off at hemp stores in another state. You have to take this seriously as a public health crisis, as a national security crisis, but you can't just look at it as local law enforcement, knocking down one pot house at a time. Because here in Maine, everybody who's been arrested, I mean, they're slaves. They're victims of this conspiracy, and we lock them up and spend money taking them to trial, whatever, but they're victims of a criminal conspiracy. They're paying off a debt to a snakehead who smuggled them over the Mexican border. And you don't have to believe my reporting. You can read the indictment that was filed in the District of Massachusetts last week, which alleges that 17 indicted co-conspirators, all Chinese nationals, participated in an elaborate human smuggling scheme that brought Chinese nationals over the border from Mexico, flew them to New England, and stationed them at illicit marijuana grows in Maine to grow cannabis. These guys were driving around in Porsches, wearing $75,000 Rolexes, $75,000 Cartier bracelets. And the indictment has the whole scheme there, $300,000 bank checks to Chinese law firms and other law firms in New England, payments to their landlords up here in Maine. So it's the scheme has been laid out there, and it's obvious for anyone who wants to see it. But it can't just be, local cops knocking out, pot houses and arresting human trafficking victims.
With what you've uncovered and with this now being a multi-state issue that we are seeing, do you think that this is kind of like the head of the snake being in the Northeast, and this spans the entire United States? Like, these operations are coast to coast, just operating in broad daylight.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question.
Yeah.
There's no question at all. I mean, but Maine's not the head of the snake. Maine is, I mean, the head of the snake is ultimately in Beijing, you know, and at the, you know, the consulates on the West Coast and the East Coast. But the playbook that was run in Maine was first developed in California and Washington State and Oklahoma. You know, we've seen tremendous evidence of, you know, ties, whether it's real estate records, tax records, people's mailing address, stuff that comes out from law enforcement investigations. I mean, I was at a marijuana grow in Eastport, Maine, which is as far east as you can get in the United States, on land anyways, looking out at, you know, the island, Campobello Island, where FDR used to have his winter White House or his summer White House. And beautiful, beautiful place in an old sardine factory that had been converted into a marijuana grow. And there was OSU picnic blankets blotting out the windows so that the light wouldn't interfere with the life cycle of marijuana plants. And, you know, I'm not an FBI agent, but that's a pretty good clue that these guys came from Oklahoma or had some ties to Oklahoma. You see stuff like that all the time. But it's a playbook. They knew how to run it. They brought it into Maine in 2020 when legalization happened.
And just for context, these are illegal operations that are
yes,
that are going on. These are not actors that are operating under the guise of legal licensed marijuana operations. These are illegal grows.
Well, it's a little bit of both. So, you know, just to give people some background who might not be familiar, Maine in 2016 voted to legalize marijuana for adult use. We already had an existing medicinal program, but it was pretty small. In 2020, we came out with legislation that created an adult use recreational program that runs side by side in parallel with the medicinal program. By sales volume, if you look at tax records, the medicinal side is bigger, is still very, very healthy and robust. And it's counterintuitive, but the medicinal side doesn't have metric, track and trace, mandatory testing. Most of the legit medicinal players will still do testing, and they have certificates of analysis that aren't made on ChatGPT, so you can see that they're, you know, they want customers to know that they have a good product. The adult use side, however, they use metric, mandatory testing, track and trace. So most of the illegal Chinese operators initially came to Maine thinking that they were going to be able to run the California playbook. So they started looking for, you know, 300,000 square foot mill buildings and old shoe factories, massive, massive spaces. But they quickly learned that that wasn't how the rules worked in Maine. And eventually they downsized and moved into the medicinal program. But then the medicinal plant count limits were so low that they ended up getting suspended. And you can see just the pattern was they went, hey, if we just go out in rural Maine and buy a house, we can grow 3,000 plants and nobody's going to bug us. And that's what happened. And, you know, I in talking with Tucker, I said there's probably 400 to 500 illegal operations in the state of Maine. I think that was way low based on the volume, the torrent of information that's come in after that Tucker interview came out. I would say we're looking at 700 to 1,000 properties in the state of Maine that are growing illegally. And since we started reporting on them, there has been a trend of some of these Chinese growers are getting medicinal caregiver licenses from the Office of Cannabis Policy. And John Hudak, you know, who's a close friend of the people who now run Metric, comes out of Colorado through the Brookings Institute, and then is Maine's Office of Cannabis Policy Director, making $170,000 a year. He has said in January in a legislative committee in testimony that he knows he's giving licenses to individuals who have connections to Asian transnational crime. He said that it's on camera, and he said we know that they're not, you know, coming out to run legit programs. We know that they are just using this as camouflage. But the effect of getting a medicinal license means that even a sheriff or local police chief who knows exactly what's going on can't touch them. So they're totally untouchable, and the inspection regime is anemic here. And, you know, it's my own tinfoil hat conspiracy theory that John Hudak intentionally used the Chinese criminal organizations and their marijuana operations in order to muddy up the medicinal market because he wants to get rid of it. He wants everything to be, you know, one program, track and trace, mandatory no bid contracts to Metric. I mean, it's pretty obvious.
So where's the end game here? Like, is this something that you plan to bring up to the federal level to, let's say, get the DEA, ATF, the law enforcement apparatus of the United States, involved in? Because this seems to be playing exactly into the administration's hand with what they want to get shored up on U.S. soil.
Yeah, the end game is that they lose, Americans win. That's it. They, get out of my state. Probably in all likelihood, they're going to move to Ohio or another state that has, recently legalized cannabis. But, the end game here is equal enforcement of the laws, regardless of whether you're French Canadian or have an Asian surname. We don't have that right now in Maine. There's a federal case right now still pending against a grower who was doing things legally and doing, 1/1,000,000th of what the Chinese are doing, allegedly. And he's had the federal DEA after him, the FBI, wiretaps, the entire might of the federal government coming down, trying to lock him in a cage. That case is still pending with the Justice Department, and his petition to be heard in front of the Supreme Court was denied. His name is Lucas Sorois, and he was growing out of Farmington, Maine, where it just so happens there's tons of illegal Chinese growers who are doing the same thing, except for they're not even trying to be compliant, and they're using slave labor. They're dodging their taxes. They're dodging fees. So there's an inequitable enforcement of the laws. That needs to change. That's fundamentally un-American. And then there's a public health crisis, too, with the toxins that are in this weed. You need a level playing field. I don't really have a horse in this race. I'm not invested in cannabis stocks, and I can't say I follow them that closely. But I would think that a federal legalization, a federal law about cannabis would make it much easier to regulate and investigate the wrongdoers. And also, in a selfish way, as a guy from Maine, the demand for cannabis is national, even international. I mean, there are other countries complaining to the United States about how much weed is coming from the United States into their countries now, illegally grown, obviously, if it's crossing international boundaries. But the international demand is being supplied by just a few states where it's legal. I mean, we saw that in California, the raid last week in California. Like, do we honestly believe that all the weed grown in California is smoked by Californians? I mean, maybe they do have a huge appetite for it, but I don't think so. No. I mean, in Oklahoma, there's something like 30 or 40 times the amount of cannabis that could possibly be smoked by Oklahomans is being grown. I mean, it doesn't pass the straight face test.
So let me ask you then, when you look at all this stuff that's taking place, look, kudos to you to get onto Tucker Carlson's podcast. That's incredible. And we're seeing more and more big name people outside of cannabis with some pretty big followings that are starting to talk about this topic more. Do you think, because we're seeing lots of rumors that it could be close that the Trump administration does announce rescheduling, but it's badly needed? Do you think by making these appearances and more people like Tucker starting to talk about this more and more that we are close to seeing some change? Because it's needed, as I said.
I don't know what it's going to have as far as the rescheduling debate. I think it's going to force some Republican senators to revisit the idea of hemp being just something that Thomas Jefferson made rope with. That I think it's we're kind of exposing that as a loophole. This THCA business where very obviously illegally grown cannabis is smuggled across state lines and sold using payment processors like Visa and Square, and cannabis dollars are moving into banks that don't want to have anything to do with a licensed business in Maine that's trying to follow the rules. So I think that it's going to have an effect on the hemp loophole. I think it's going to have an effect on the immigration enforcement, certainly when it comes to the Chinese grows out in California who are using Central American illegal aliens. And I think that you will see heightened enforcement on the anti-money laundering laws, the money laundering that's going on, and the wire fraud and the mail fraud in order to facilitate the organized crime, I think is going to become a big problem. And it's going to become a problem for the criminal organizations for sure. But in terms of scheduling, it's such a hotly debated thing. I think maybe if they can find a way to give the Trump kids a slice of the income, maybe, Trump Kush or something like that. Maybe there's an angle there. We could get it rescheduled, but
that was not planned, by the way.
Good insight.
I've been saying that for a while. You got to economically incentivize the kids. And I've been saying that for months. You got to find a way to economically incentivize Eric and Donald Jr., and then this will move very quickly.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look at the
throughout
the
the entire.
cryptocurrencies. I mean, it's
Correct.
the same angle there. I
Yeah.
mean, the president is a famous teetotaler. I don't know if he's ever smoked pot, and he's not overly familiar with it, other than probably has a negative stereotype of it. But he understands business, and I
Correct.
think that's that's the direction that the industry is heading in. But the problem is, due to its gray, murky status, nationally illegal but still legal at the
Yes.
state level, where we're mixing our criminal elements with the people trying to do things the right way. And
Correct.
what I've seen in Maine is the illegal growers, because of in some cases stealing electricity, they're growing way over the plant limit. They're using slave labor. It turns out, your margins are better when you use slaves. This is the miracle, the miraculous insight that the Chinese have stumbled on. Using slaves is great for cutting down your labor costs. I mean, I guess Glasshouse figured that out allegedly as well too. But the exploited laborer gives them the ability to sell, a pound at 50% what a legal licensed business can sell a pound of marijuana at. And so you're putting tremendous economic pressure on growers in Maine to cut corners and to also sell out of state, because they're business owners. They're trying to feed their families. A lot of this was happening in the middle of COVID, when there's tremendous economic uncertainty. So you're backing these people into a corner after they've invested $500,000 in a small business that you told them was going to be legit and people were all going to be following the rules.
Yeah.
And then you're not enforcing the rules fairly.
Well,
and so we're creating an incentive for this kind of criminality.
Well, one thing
that
that
could not have been better said.
Yeah.
In terms of the current economics around the environment of cannabis.
What grabbed my attention too at Tucker was when you said that it was low risk, and you're right, because it's been legalized in Maine. There's so much gray area, and it's not a priority for law enforcement. But you look at some of these rural states like Oklahoma and Maine, and it's just like it's such a turnkey process for a lot of these companies that just, I don't know if you want to call them companies, but just the reality of where they set up shop and are taking advantage of the system. But the reality is, it's just there's just not a lot enough people, I think, in Washington that really understand as to what's going on, which is why there needs to be some sort of direction from the federal level, which is so badly needed right now. But when I heard you say that, I was just like, the light went off, and you're right. It is low risk right now, and it's not a priority. And it's been easy sailing for a lot of these crime organizations for a long period of time, which is an eye opener. But at least we're having these conversations now and getting more and more educated about it.
And I guess another detail I'll add to that is that all of the people who are being arrested at these properties in Maine, they are, I believe, victims of human trafficking. And I think that the evidence that we have points to that. They're not the people who are driving the Ferraris and wearing the Rolexes. They're not ultimately the people who benefit from these things. And oftentimes, hardly ever do you see the property owner of the cannabis house arrested. And often they're not even interviewed by law enforcement, because it's not within their jurisdiction, because they live in another state. And if they do talk with them, I had no idea that this was going on. I just rented to my cousin so-and-so. I'm shocked. I'll look into this. So they have a way of distributing any kind of liability if they do get caught. In the rare event that, some journalists, starts jumping up and down and, pointing at a marijuana grow, and they do decide to raid it, they're still not going to get in trouble. Ultimately, the people who benefit from this, they just don't get in trouble at all. But there's one guy that we featured in the documentary Tucker published that we made, that was he's a Bosnia vet. He has PTSD. He doesn't smoke weed. He gets drug tested. He was one of the rare cannabis industry guys who just cannot smoke weed because he has a side job where he gets drug tested. And he invested $650,000 in his own business, made a greenhouse. It's robotic. He can run it from his phone. He's an electrical engineer. He's in the documentary giving this very moving interview about the economic incentives that are forcing him under. And he, since we interviewed him, he's out of business now. He was debanked. His insurance company won't insure him. He's got a $650,000 marijuana grow on his property that he cannot get a license for, cannot get insurance for, cannot get banking for. And even if he could, the price is so low and the price of electricity is so high, it wouldn't even make sense for him to grow and use that business. So it's, you're devastating people who wanted to play by the rules, and you're rewarding people who don't.
Hence the reason tax dollars these states need. I don't get it, but go ahead, Anthony.
In terms of the actual product, there's been a big conversation around THCA flower as it relates to hemp and as it relates to illicit cannabis being sold into those channels. Have you had the chance to go down the rabbit hole and potentially track any of this product or uncover where this product is going that's being manufactured in Maine? Is it going into those, let's say, hemp smoke shops that are masquerading, selling THCA flower that's just illicit cannabis that's being sold straight into it?
So we haven't found an actual end destination for who the consumer is. An assistant attorney general in Maine testified on some legislation related to the Chinese grow houses that they assessed 2/3 of the product was leaving the state. We have identified some medicinal dispensaries in the state that we believe are selling this product. The way the operation worked in 2021 and 2022 is members of this criminal organization or criminal organizations like this would get a medicinal license, and they would go around to the illegal grows and get trash bags full of weed. They would go to the dispensaries and say, "Hey, here's $800 a pound. Here's my caregiver card." And so the dispensary owner had every reason to believe, well, this could be legit. I don't know, except for the price and the fact that all the baggies are different and all the flowers are different, and it very obviously didn't all come from one grow.
And there's no COA, I'm assuming.
No. Absolutely. That's why, the medicinal program does not require testing. So the dispensary owner, though, you're trying to put, food on the table, middle of COVID, economic uncertainty.
Yeah.
And this guy is offering you cannabis that's half what the licensed, French and Irish guys are offering you. Yeah. And he appears to be licensed and, speaks pretty good English. So I don't know, it might be racist against Asian people not to buy it off him. You might have to buy it off him just to clean your conscience. But the transition from medicinal to purely illegal, then back to medicinal now, I think has been driven by the media attention and by the enforcement. Yeah. And eventually, I think that, if the law enforcement starts taking this seriously in New England through the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Department of Justice, and maybe even with financial crimes like wire fraud, mail fraud, and bank fraud, then they'll be driven out of New England completely. But they will find another place to set up shop in because, again, they don't care if human trafficking victims get arrested. $500 bail, you're out. Who cares? There was a place I think I talked about in the episode with Tucker, ironically in Freedom, Maine, 4 individuals got carbon monoxide poisoning at an illicit Chinese marijuana grow. 2 of them ended up dying. I've subsequently learned those remains were never claimed. No one cared. No one cared. Like no one knew those. No one.
Their remains were never claimed.
Never. And despite an effort by the state medical examiner to track down family and the 2 Chinese nationals who were at the marijuana grow and survived, they admitted to being in the country illegally. They spoke fluent Cantonese and fluent Spanish. They spoke no English whatsoever, and they admitted that they were here illegally. And because it was the Biden administration, HSI said, don't even bother trying to deport these guys.
Wow. TDR's Trade to Black podcast. I'm your host, Shad Dales, with Anthony Varell and Steve Robinson, editor-in-chief from the Maine Wire. Great interview that you had last week with Tucker Carlson to shed light on the Maine market and the illicit market as to what's going on. Part of that interview also that grabbed my attention was the fact that there was many locals suspected what was going on, but stayed silent. And you had mentioned because they were afraid that they'd be, I guess, being called racist. So how big of a role do you think did political correctness or really media fear play into allowing this to escalate? It had to had some sort of role.
Oh, massive. I mean, this was very, very big on the law enforcement side of the equation. Early on in writing about this, I was asked to go on Fox News, and unbeknownst to me, a sheriff in Maine was also invited on. And the sheriff's response to a Fox producer was, I'd ask that you not, say anything about these people all being Chinese. And of course, the Fox producer put that up on the screen. Can you believe this? The sheriff's asking for us to cover this up.
He did.
But yeah, so that was incredibly awkward for the sheriff and a lesson in dealing with media, I suppose. But that force is that pressure is seen throughout the law enforcement community and even in the way the Department of Justice handles things at the federal level. If you see, the Justice Department has moved to seize 4 properties in the state of Maine, and all 4 were owned through LLCs. And I think that's significant because there's 400 or 500 that are owned by people who have Chinese names, and the name is listed on the deed rather than an LLC. I think they very intentionally went after the ones where an LLC owns it so they could say, hey, look, this is colorblind. We're going after a corporate entity. We didn't know that the principal officers were all, Chinese guys from Malden or Flushing, New York or California. So I think that's not a coincidence that those are the properties that they're seizing, and it's been a tremendous influence. Part of it's cultural too. I mean, people in Maine, as I told Tucker, just are not going to get in other people's business. And then also during COVID, there was tremendous in-migration from New York and Massachusetts of everybody. Everybody was fleeing the cities to come up and live in Maine, throwing cash at properties to buy them. And so the Chinese organized crime were very well camouflaged, and they knew it too. They very strategically, there was a young couple would come in and buy the house, and they'd go and they'd talk with neighbors. They'd give the neighbors a bottle of wine, and they'd say, hey, we bought this house. You might see our family here from time to time, but we're just, hiding out from COVID. And then that couple would never be seen again. It would be a steady flow of individuals who didn't speak English after that. But they knew what they were doing. They're very smart. They're very savvy. And they're going to move in ways that hide and obscure what it is they're doing. And they're making a ton of money.
Spend time on one thing for a while. Eventually, you're going to get good at it, regardless of what you do in life. And evidently, this is what they've been doing for quite some time. But this runs back all the way to Beijing. So the scope of this operation, it's more than just Maine and a few states. This goes back to the motherland, so to speak. And there's a lot of people involved in this. And you think this is happening across, well, of course it is. But the question is how many states is this actually happening? Do you think there's stuff like this happening in every single state across America? Or most?
Well, I think it's being sold in every state for sure. I would say yes. I would be surprised if it wasn't. I don't particularly know of any state that's doing a very good job at preventing this kind of thing from happening. And again, the economic incentives all point towards rewarding their business model. Organized crime is just a business. They're a business that's willing to break the laws. And if these guys come into Maine and they can buy a property for 20% over the asking price, close in 20 days, cash offer, I mean, who's not going to sell to them and move to Florida? That's what's going to happen. And so, and the real estate agents, they're incentivized to make that happen. The closing agents, the title transfers, the lawyers, everybody has an incentive to make this business happen. They're all getting paid along the way. And we know based on the indictment that was handed down in Massachusetts last week that there are Maine landlords who are getting paid rent for their facilities, and the Chinese organized crime are doing a brisk business out of their facilities there. So there's a lot of economic incentives that reward this kind of behavior, and that's true in every single state. So I'm sure if they're not there, it's only a matter of time. But certainly the hemp, the product, the end user is there, and the poisonous weed and the victim really of what's happening in Maine. Yeah, they're in all 50 states. I would be stunned if that wasn't the case. It's international.
Yeah. So here's a big question, probably the most important one. Based off of all this investigation reporting that you've been doing pertaining to this, do you think change is going to happen as a result of it? Because I'm sure that would be ideal. But do you think actually this is going to get into the eyes and awareness of lawmakers in Maine that we will see change?
In Maine, I think the big question is going to be in 2026. Are we going to see a shift towards Republicans having more power? For the last 6 years, we've had a Democratic governor. Her brother has, provably done business with illicit Chinese marijuana traffickers based on real estate records that we've reported on.
No kidding.
And she hasn't said a word about this. Biggest criminal conspiracy unfolding in her state. National news coverage from NBC News, Tucker Carlson, Fox News. We've asked her about it in person. We've camped outside her office. She hasn't said a single word about the Chinese organized crime in this state. Maura Healey has said more about it, and all she said was that she was grateful that there was an indictment handed down last week. So she's ineligible to run for re-election in 2026. So we're going to see a race for an open seat there. If you have a Republican governor, I think you're going to see a sharp shift in direction and a new director of the Office of Cannabis Policy. But our legislature has also been controlled by Democrats who are, they get campaign contributions from some of the very large marijuana companies, and they have a certain view of what they want marijuana laws to look like. And it's like a Baptist and a bootleggers problem where the Chinese growers muddying up the market and creating popular demand for a regulatory clampdown benefits them, because the large companies have the capital to survive big regulatory changes and harsh regulatory costs, whereas the mom and pops don't. So
Right.
they want the mom and pops washed out, and they're going to donate to the party that will listen to them when it comes to cannabis legislation, as opposed to the consumers or the entrepreneurs, the people who have invested their life savings in building a small business. So, I mean, I'm optimistic. It's possible that you see political change here, but I would say it's more likely to come from the federal government than any change at the state level. There'll probably be a change in my home address before there's political change in the state of Maine.
Yeah, you're born and raised in Maine. Is what I learned. Been there.
Yes, it came up a few times during the podcast, as Kirk Minahan and the Minifans pointed out on his Barstool Sports podcast. But yes, I was born and raised in Maine.
Yeah. Well, I look at this, and honestly, on behalf of the industry, I want to say thank you for the investigative reporting that you did. I think it's we need more stories like this. Outside of you growing up in Maine, like, I'm curious, like, outside of what you're doing right now with the Maine Wire, what's your background, and how did you arrange to get everything all hooked up and connected with Tucker? Because that's some great exposure that you gave the industry.
Well, I was actually never really a cannabis reporter. I was a conservative talk radio producer. I produced the Howie Carr Show for a number of years, and then I went to work at Barstool Sports on the Kirk Minahan Show. And I actually caught the investigative reporting bug working with Kirk on his cold case podcast, The Case, which started out looking for a woman named Jennifer Fay, who went missing in the 80s in Brockton, Massachusetts. And that led us to chase, meth heads around South Carolina.
Wow.
In the middle of COVID too, which was an interesting experience. And that investigation that Kirk did and published through Barstool Sports ended in the prosecutor there reopening a case and reclassifying a death rather than an accidental overdose as a murder charge. It didn't stick, but ultimately I think we were able to shed some light on a problem in this part of South Carolina. But the investigative tactics, skills, and the dynamics that I learned working for Kirk on the Case podcast certainly came in handy as we went about investigating the organized crime here in Maine. But we've started the Maine Wire. I took over the mainwire.com at the end of 2022. And we're building a nonprofit journalism apparatus based on investigative journalism. And we started getting in, we cover primarily politics, but what I've discovered is that there's a lot of overlap between politics and organized crime. And so there was a leaked Homeland Security document that said that there were 270 illicit grow houses in Maine. And I saw that and said, geez, I bet I can find them. And I could. It's really, really not that hard once you learn what you're looking for.
Well, when you factor in all the people that are involved, it's more than meets the eye. It's like, how is this here? But then when you start to understand as to what the whole story is about, you understand why it's here, and not for good reason. It's a head scratcher, but wow. What is
everybody's making money. Everybody's making money. How much? I know people who would do some crazy shit for $10,000. What about 10 million? Probably do some crazy shit for that much money.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, this has been great. Hope to have you on again to learn more about this. But best of luck. For people who want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to get a hold of you on Substack?
They can sign up for my Substack, asmainegoes.com, and they can email me through there. They can follow me on Twitter. It's at BigSteve207. My DMs are open. They can, find my email. I'm very easy to get in touch with. And, I'll say the indictment in the District of Massachusetts included a note that they were sharing my reporting on WeChat. So they were reading my reporting, but 4 or 5 days after it had come out. So if you sign up for our newsletter, you'll get it right when it comes out. Okay. We unfortunately do not do a Cantonese language version.
Good stuff, my friend. All right. I know there's a lot of stuff that we want to talk about more in the future with you, including some interesting, great stories that you had about your days covering the New England Patriots and stuff like that. We'll get into that. We'll get into that later from your days at Barstool. But oh man, you had some funny stuff. But I'm not going to get into that right now. But Steve, keep in touch. Great work. On behalf of Anthony and I and our whole community here, job well done, and keep up the great work, okay?
Of course. Thanks, guys. Anytime.
All right. Steve. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it. Wow. That runs deep, real deep, doesn't it?
It does. And it coincides with the narrative around THCA flower, which obviously don't want to start to scapegoat hemp again. But I mean, that is one of the main contributions to THCA flower. And it's why I've been an advocate, a staunch advocate on the regulation of THCA flower. It is a channel and a Trojan horse for illicit product.
Yes.
Like point stop. It's been proven. It's being proven greater by the day. This illicit product has nowhere else to go other than the black market and then through the THCA flower channels. That is fact.
Well, when you think about what Trump stands for in his administration, it aligns with everything that we've been saying. But what we need is more support and help, even from a media coverage, to shed light on this space as to what's going on. We've seen Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, the stuff that he said in the press, and was there enough qualified reporters there to press him on a lot of the claims that he made? And there wasn't. But when you see stories like this, and great job, obviously, getting on with Tucker Carlson, that's a big reach. And there's more and more people that are actually coming out and talking about this, which is why we firmly believe, and a lot of our guests over the past week firmly believe, that this feels different when it comes to reform, because there's stories like this that are going behind that stem all the way back to Beijing. And it needs to be actually communicated, and these people need to know. So anyway.
And FDAC, by the way, in Florida has been pulling hemp product off the shelves for the last month. Their new regulations went live June 16th. And there's reports on a weekly basis now, just tens of thousands of products getting pulled off the shelf by FDAC with those updates and regulations in the state of Florida. So Florida is actively cleaning up the intoxicating hemp industry down here without banning it.
I hear you, David Benz. We need to get on Tucker's show. We've also tried reaching out to Matt Gates' team. Not sure how, what the chances are of getting him on, knowing with his own podcast now. But we have reached out to his team to see if we can get him on as well. But it'd be great to be on Tucker's show to talk more about this. But all right, that wraps up segment one. Segment one, TDR's Traded Black podcast, presented by Dutchie here on a Monday. It's now time for segment number 2, Insider's Edge with Michael Bronstein. Let's go, Arns. Here on a Monday afternoon, Anthony Vrell, Shad Dales, good to have you all. Hope you had a great weekend. Leave some comments below. Let us know what you thought of that first interview. A lot of great intel from Steve, and feel free to ask any questions. But with that, we got the news last week from the state Senate regarding PA and SB 120 being introduced on the floor, bipartisan support. So now we want to find out what's next. And to learn, let's welcome in the president of the American Trade Association of Cannabis and Hemp, Michael Bronstein. Happy Monday. How are you, sir?
Gentlemen, happy Monday. It's obviously been very busy on the Pennsylvania front and several other national stories that we've been working on. Have
you? Care to share, or you got to keep that tight-lipped?
I didn't keep it tight-lipped. I'm here to share.
Well, let's share.
I'm just going to mention it? No, I can't share it. I'm leaving.
There's dual bills. There's dual bills now flying in the PA legislature, isn't there, Michael?
There are 2 other bills dropped today.
Okay.
In the PA legislature, there is a Kincaid major bill, which has been long awaited, has been introduced into the House. All of these are somewhat similar from a regulatory perspective. They do have some key differences, but I think for the audience here to just know, and we can get into them, right? I'll go as deep as you want, but the thing is that the important takeaway from this is that these are not state store bills. Okay. State store idea had been voted on. It was killed in the Senate at the beginning of the budget process. Now we are here picking up the pieces from those votes and from the politics that had ensued at a couple of months ago, as we've been running through. So, as some of you may know, or for those of you who are following, the PA budget process has stalled quite considerably. There was supposed to be a budget on June 30th. There is no budget in Pennsylvania right now. Though today, Democrats are in the process in the House of passing bills that will give a budget number, but the Senate, which is Republican held, is not in session right now and could be called back on 24-hour notice. But the reality is that we are unlikely to see a budget agreement until the Senate comes back in. In fact, if the Senate comes back in, that is the indication, in my view, of likely that there's a budget agreement. So what are these two bills that dropped? Well, we have Laughlin Street dropped last week, which was 120, and that is the one that most of us have been watching for quite some time on this, right? Senator Laughlin, a Republican from Erie, which is in the top western part of the state, kind of a bellwether district. Senator Laughlin was one of the first Republicans in the Senate that was for adult use legalization. Also widely influential as the chair of the Senate's Law and Justice Committee, which is the committee of jurisdiction for marijuana legislation in the Senate, and was also the one who shot down the state stores. I wanted to say unceremoniously, but it was very ceremonious when it happened. So he was behind that. And Senator Street, who was from Philadelphia, who is also running for Congress now, but Senator Street is the chairman of the Democratic Party.
Yep.
As well as a state senator, respected state senator from Philadelphia, currently running, is in the Senate, but is also running for Congress in what is Dwight Evans' district now, and Dwight Evans is retiring. So this was big. I mean, there was really plenty of press that was picked up all throughout the last week. There was a lot of chatter. And there was a lot of chatter in the major media markets in Pennsylvania about adult use being back live as a conversation from a budget perspective. And the hope is that this introduction turns the page. And then immediately what we saw today was the introduction of Kincaid Major. And we saw a co-sponsorship memo by a representative named Ahmad Brown from Philadelphia, who also had dropped a co-sponsorship memo, companion bill last session with Senator Laughlin and Senator Street. So that is a lot of activity.
No kidding. I was going to say.
Question. I guess this is a two-parter. Do multiple bills make this more complicated, or is that a positive? And I think last week the GOP leader in Pennsylvania came out and said adult use is not going to get done this year as per the budget. Does that have any teeth, or is that just posturing and just false rhetoric?
He's one of the three that's negotiating. So that's Senator Pittman came out quickly afterwards and said that he didn't feel that there was appetite in the Senate Republican caucus for having it be part of this year's budget. But there has yet to be any deal that has emerged on this year's budget. So it's hard to say what the budget is or is not going to include at this point. And a couple of weeks ago, it looked like that they were circling around basically doing a budget around gaming and then doing a budget around transit and marijuana being on the outside of the circle to be addressed at a later date. Now I think everything is up in the everything is up in the air. There is nothing that is there's nothing that has been formalized right now, though all parties say that that they are that they're working. The reality is the Senate's not in right now. The House is passing spending bills that the Senate's not responding to, and behind closed doors, it does not seem like that they're close.
So if this isn't in the budget this year, are we just gonna is this what happens? Is we got to have this conversation again a year from now, where it gets pushed back another 365 days?
I think that the conversation. So Pennsylvania is a full-time legislature.
Okay,
so they are in session year-round.
Okay,
and if it did not make this budget, I suspect that there would be a push in the fall.
Because I bring that up because we had Trent Woloveck from Dutchie on Friday, and he brought up the fact of the one big beautiful bill that passed, and some tax revenue that's actually going to be missing within the state of Pennsylvania since that bill has been passed, which made me think, where's that money going to come from? So is there truth to that where it could be more like, where's that money? There's like $2 to $3 billion that may not be within the state's revenue moving forward based off of that bill. And if that's the case, then where does that money come from? And what does that present for what we're trying to basically share and learn here about adult use?
It creates a lot of pressure in the state to find new revenue sources. Now, the state does have rainy day funds that have been proposed as a fill for some of this budget. I mean, it's always proposed as some level of fill in the budget, but this new revenue item, and I've said here before, and I'll say it again, there are two places, right? And the third is politically untenable, right? The first two places are gaming,
yep,
right, and marijuana,
yep,
right. Those are one and two. The third place is raising taxes.
That's
and I don't see raising taxes as being a viable political option for raising revenue when there are other ways to raise revenue on the table. That is a break the glass type situation. Okay. And you have a governor who does not want to raise taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you have Senate Republicans who are running for re-election that do not want to raise taxes. Nobody wants to raise taxes. So if you don't want to raise taxes, there are a couple of things that you can do. And they're right there. And today we have two more bills that you can do that with than we did a week ago.
And gee, I wonder if it works. Well, there's a few neighboring states that have a proof of concept, which, again, seems crazy that we're still in this conversation, but we are where we are. So what's next then? I think that's the big thing. The key takeaway is that Senate basically is not in office. What's the timeline on that? Do we know? Is it can they come back at any given time? Is it a week, a month? Like, what do you know?
They're on call to come back if there's a deal that's cut. The Senate will be called back. I think they're on 12 or 24-hour notice to come back to the Capitol should something happen where a deal is cut and they need to come and vote. They need to come and vote on something.
And that can happen at any time.
Yeah, that could happen at any time.
Yeah.
But it hasn't.
How much urgency is there from the governor's office in Harrisburg to get this done? Is he involved at all in this? Or this is kind of just down to the representatives and the state senators to kind of break bread, get this done, and figure out a deal?
There are three principal people that I think are involved from a budget negotiation standpoint, that if they come together and they have a deal, there's a deal, right? It's the governor, it's the majority leader in the House, and it is the majority leader in the Senate. Okay. They come together, they cut a deal that they know their caucuses can get behind. In the case of legislative leaders, and they'll come back and they'll vote it through. Okay. So there's there was on Friday, what was said in public was that folks need to understand that they need to compromise to some extent on this budget. And it'll be interesting to see what they pass tonight. So they're not going to pass there won't be like a gaming or legalization or anything. What it's likely going to happen is they'll have general appropriations, which basically, like, you add up all the numbers in Pennsylvania. Yeah. What are we going to spend this stuff on? Right. And it just adds all the numbers up of what they're spending stuff on. And then that's the basis for what the next level of negotiation is going to be. So we're not really going to have an indication from that particular bill about what it is that they're going to circle on and what it is that they're finally going to take. This is sort of like watching the Pope being selected, right? Like, we're sort of waiting for the smoke to come out of the chimney so that we know, we know that there's a deal in place.
Okay. After last week's news, in your own words, how do you think all this is progressing?
I think that the pressure to get adult use done is more formidable in the state than I think people who are elected realized, especially with the media coverage that was going on when these particular bills were dropped.
Mhm.
And it carried that narrative forward because there hasn't been as much narrative around, there have been bits and pieces around it, but the media really, really leaned in over the last 4 or 5 days onto doing this as part of a budget deal. And they leaned in every major media market on this because everybody knows that there isn't enough money there. And we're starting to see stories in state of like, okay, well, food banks aren't getting money anymore, right? We're starting to hear about schools where, okay, well, the budget, like people are starting to try to figure out key budget deadlines because now school districts in Pennsylvania are going to have to figure out if they have to borrow money because of when the state appropriations is going to happen for them. So the pressure is building here to do something. It used to be in the state that you didn't go to work, like state employees wouldn't get paid during a budget shutdown. Okay, they would go on furlough. And so there's a lot of pressure that happens.
Are these bills suggesting where the tax dollars could potentially be allocated? So, for instance, like in Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, when they brought their program online, was like medical taxes are going to go to paying school lunches. You're getting X amount of millions on an annualized basis subsidized, and that program is going to be funded by cannabis. Are they doing that proactively in the state of Pennsylvania with these bills, saying we have the total addressable market that potentially could yield X? This is where we want to allocate, and this is how it's going to benefit the communities that are embracing adult use cannabis. In any idea?
That did happen at the beginning of the budget period when Shapiro published his budget.
Okay.
Right now in these bills, the bills do break up where revenue would go and how much of it would go into the general fund. What I would say is that these bills also, though, are going to be adjusted because, like, right now, I mean, in one of the bills, there's 40% that just goes to operating the board, which would be an astronomical number to operate any authority. Likely those numbers get shifted around, and instead of, say, 25% of what comes in goes into the general fund, you'll start seeing a much larger percentage of that fund to go in there. I saw 10% allocations for drug abuse prevention, 10% for local law enforcement, right? We saw some of those things that came through in the proposals that we're seeing in front of us. But like, look, the thing is like this revenue is spent 6 ways to Sunday. They need
already.
Okay?
Before it's even generated.
They need it.
Yeah.
Okay. Things
need
are
it.
like,
I just can't wrap my head around this. They need the money. How much is it? 70% of the state is like approves adult use cannabis within Pennsylvania right now. So the people want it. Like, how much apprehension plays with some of these lawmakers about the history of cannabis? Like, is that still what we're talking about here?
Ron DeSantis.
I mean, look, it's not just that though. I mean, it's the politics around the issue, right? We had a state store bill that got in the way of some of the negotiations that were happening early on in the process when they moved, right? So there's politics around the state store system and alcohol, right? And some of those politics had to be litigated, right? It's not just because like all of these things are being put in place, but I could show you a number of different things that the American public is for that Congress hasn't moved on because it just hasn't created the political situation. In Pennsylvania, we are very much approaching that point where that political point has to happen because of all the pressure that's building up.
We are at that point.
Yeah.
We are there.
And that's why, too, it's like if the politicians want cover fire, here's what cannabis dollars are going to go to. You're going to go to after-school programs, community building initiatives, kids' lunches, building up the impoverished. Like, that is exactly where the dollars are going to be allocated. So you're going to have to live with adult use cannabis, but it's going to fortify the community and help on these levels. That's a decent trade-off if we're talking about just ebbs and flows of having to deal with cannabis, especially from a constituent's perspective.
And remember what I said we should look for last week, right? We should look for language.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
And what are we seeing? We're seeing language.
Yeah.
All right. Now there are actually bills that people can go out and campaign on.
Yeah.
All right. Gretchen is 1,000% right about the conservativeness of Pennsylvania too.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, here's the thing that I'll add on top of that point. Republicans in the Senate are not aligned on what it is that they think all of this should look like. And the thing that they care about the most is holding the caucus together.
Gotcha.
Right? And having leadership votes. Okay.
You got some for, some against, and all they worry about is this Republican Party, this caucus of being closely knitted together and making sure everybody's on the same page for re-election, I assume, correct?
For re-election. Because that's what matters the most, re-election. Is somebody going to lose re-election on the cannabis issue? Well, I mean, if they're in a district where, like 70% of people are for it and they're totally against it and they're against it for wrong reasons, right? Maybe it's an issue, right? But all the polling has bared out that voting for cannabis legalization, irrespective of where you sit in the party, is not an issue. But let me tell you something. Most people in Pennsylvania are not worried about general elections. They're worried about primary elections because of the way the seats are drawn.
Right.
So say you're a Republican, you don't want to make yourself look too liberal on an issue if you're in a conservative district. Okay. And you don't want to have to put a vote up necessarily.
Even if 70% of Pennsylvanians are in favor of this?
Even if 70% of Pennsylvanians are in favor of it, because the Republican, depending on what district you're in, you got to remember, where's the Republican primary voter on this? Now, the Republican primary voter, if you're only caring about primaries, we've polled. Republican primary voter doesn't care. Okay. But the reality is that there's still people who are like, I'm worried about this.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm worried about taking a legalization vote. There were people in the Democratic caucus that were worried about taking a legalization vote. You're a conservative Democrat in a more conservative area. Okay. Putting up a vote on cannabis legalization was not an easy thing, but it happened. It happened in the House.
There is so much storylines in this industry. Like we were talking on I don't know if you saw our first segment, but the amount of people that are involved with the Chinese drug gangs involved in illicit markets and who's getting paid what, from elected officials to real estate agents. And the same thing applies, I would say, in this state where there's so many different storylines that you're not aware of when it comes to re-election. It's just not all black and white to get this bill passed. But regardless, we learn a lot from you. Before I let you go, I also want to bring up the news that came down last week about this agricultural bill and hemp being pushed back a full year. Some of your, I would say, companies or companies that you deal with, what's been the feedback like since they announced that? And is there animosity? Are there some of the people happy with some of these laws that are going to be implemented over the next 365 days? Like, what's been the early feedback so far?
Yeah, I would say that the feedback on that is it depends on where you are in the ecosphere in cannabis. Like, we know that the synthetic THC issue has to be dealt with,
right?
And that Congress is dealing with it. And that 1 year, by the way, I think that the industry has interpreted the 1 year the wrong way necessarily. Right? Like, we heard McConnell talk about it, and the 1 year that he's talking about, he envisions is being able to get farmers prepared for what, in his words, he said are the future. Okay. And now we've seen the House passed this basically the same language as the Senate at this point.
Yep.
And they passed through both. They passed through both appropriations committees. That is a massive signal.
But
all right. It is a massive signal.
But if you're going by what McConnell's saying and you're preparing the farmers for what, let's say, the industry looks like a year from now, that would imply that those farmers are growing product that's going to be for industrial purposes and rope and agricultural products and things of that nature, not intoxicating products, because that language, if I'm not mistaken, would essentially kneecap intoxicating products in the realm that it's written right now. And like you just said, it's got bicameral support.
It's got bicameral support. the 1 year, I think that the 1 year provision on there, one of the other things is the House didn't have a year-long provision in there. So if they go and they negotiate, right, and you've got 0 and you've got 1, you're going to have to negotiate what the discussion is, around that bill. But the point is that this passed. I think one of the things that you have to look at in this bill is that for the first time ever, it created a definition of a hemp cannabinoid product. It actually created 3 lanes, right, where potential legalization could happen and regulation could happen, and it expressly permits the ability for cannabinoids to be added to certain products.
Gotcha.
Right. And the reality is that is actually historic when you look at it. All right. The issue I think that people have is they're trying to defend chemical conversions that are happening in the industry because the quote unquote hemp industry, right, which is not industrial hemp, the way that people are talking about it, is chemically converting CBD, all right, into other intoxicating products. All right. And the defense of that is the thing that is going to get folks in trouble. Okay. Like having THCO in the marketplace, having every other, what we've talked about, HHCs.
So
right?
do you think in a lot of ways, short term, a lot of people in this industry are unhappy, but with one door closes, another door opens, and we see some sort of reform over the next year, that in the long run, people will be happy with the new option?
I wouldn't say that everybody's unhappy.
No?
I wouldn't say that about this. I think that folks are taking stock with what the future regulation of the industry looks like. Okay. And, I think that folks who are looking at policy on a go forward basis, see some level of opportunity for regulation going forward. We can debate what the THC content of a product should be, right? And I think one of the things that people need to look at here too is that it would actually assign a regulatory agency to determine that, right? That's important from a federal perspective. And remember, what we heard around this debate is that people did not say that the Farm Bill legalized these products. Okay? That was not the intent of the Farm Bill. It would still be under the Farm Bill today. It is still not permissible to put, these products under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act and market them, which is why everybody's got all these letters. All right. Which is why we're starting to see, and we've seen stepped up enforcement over a period of the last 3, 4, 5 months.
Right.
So I think that we see where this is. I think that where we see where this is going at the federal level. I think there continues to be a discussion around regulation.
I do too.
And what sensible regulation looks like. And there'll continue to be discussions around this provision. This is, I think, an important first step to having those discussions as an industry about where it is that we need to go from a regulatory perspective.
That was the big takeaway with the year length, that 2 and 2 together. Do you believe, like most people, and I want to say most people, but the feedback on Twitter right now and some of the other outlets were saying that timeline more or less means that we are onto something when it comes to cannabis reform. How much reform? We've talked about incremental steps, but if you and I are having this conversation a year from now, I think from a reform aspect, it's going to look a lot differently from where we are today, don't you think?
Yeah. And the difference is, I think if we saw this, like these provisions that are being talked about right now were what were asked for after the 2018 Farm Bill passed. Pathway for CBD, pathway for the non-intoxicating products, being able to add them into something that was approved by the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, right?
Yeah.
The issue that we have right now is the market is different than what had happened back then. And when you hear people talk about CBD products, sometimes what they're talking about are the chemically converted products.
Correct.
Okay, that are intoxicating, that are in the market. which are not lawful right now to begin with.
Well, there's a lot of products, but there's a lot of products in the hemp industry that are using isomerized D9 that are there now. That's why it's important also to be purchasing products that are using naturally derived Delta 9 THC, because that's not converted. That's not chemically converted. Those are clean products that are probably going to stand the test of time and be those products that get put into the market on the back half of this.
And we all knew this was going to have to be cleaned up. And a regulatory agency now is going to be able to say how much.
Correct.
Right? Like, isn't that sort of what folks are like? Isn't that what folks are after from a regulatory perspective?
Yeah.
And I think that there are other bills, like the farm bill itself was an imprecise place to do this.
The worst
and I think
vehicle.
It was the worst place to do it. Right. So I think what we can do now is we can actually get to regulation. That's where I think we're moving towards.
Well, don't look now, but that was passed almost 8 years ago. It's almost a decade. It's a long time. So things change, but here we are, and we are on the verge of change. So with that, always appreciate Monday's segment. First, our Insider's Edge presented by the American Trade Association of Cannabis and Hemp, Michael Bronstein. Thanks for the feedback. And obviously, if we get some sort of announcement or any kind of call from the state Senate in Pennsylvania, meaning if they're called back in, we'll get you back on right away to see what's going to happen next. But in the meantime, let's stay in touch. Have a great week, and appreciate all the information here today, okay?
It's great. It's great to see you guys.
All right. Thanks, Michael. Appreciate your time. Yeah. Banger back-to-backs. I know it's over an hour, but we had two great guests on because we got some really important information. Looking at a few comments right now. Oop. You want me to address this one? Happy Monday, AV. You put a tweet out earlier about descheduling being close because of the House. What's that?
It wasn't about descheduling. It was about rescheduling. Gotcha.
Yeah, I know there's a few people that reached out to me when it came to timeline-wise, and I'm like, no idea. No idea. There were some people
talking about timelines is a great way to shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah. And even the people that were at the dinners in Washington over the weekend that were reaching out to us, they do feel very optimistic. They feel like, yes, there is going to be rescheduling for sure. But I think the president was supposed to be at some of these dinners. I don't think he was. He had to fly down to Texas on Friday morning to obviously deal with the floods. But there was still some pretty big heavyweights there. And some of the feedback that I got, and fingers crossed, people hope at some point, that we're going to get this relatively soon. But timeline wise, nobody knows. And I'm not about to say in a week, a month, 2 months, because if I communicate that, it'll come back on me. And these people can't give me a hard date because they don't know either. But all I can share with you now is that based on the feedback at the White House in Washington this weekend is that there's reform coming. We just don't know when, but it was very positive. So take that for what it's worth. All right, that wraps up for today's show. Do we have anybody confirmed yet for later this week? Not sure if we do. We will have some interesting interviews. Peter Sack is actually be joining us later this week and to do an interview in Chicago Atlantic, and Nevis Brands, John Kuber. He was actually at that hemp conference in Atlanta last week. So we're going to have him on later this week. Be dying to see some of the feedback and what the big takeaway from that conference was, because I know that was something you were hoping to go to but didn't get a chance to, Anthony. So we'll have a conversation with him and have that out later this week as well. And always good to hear the other side and what their perspective is, especially after last week's news. So that'll be coming out later this week as well.
Yeah. Ty Grower, by the way, as far as Glasshouse goes, I'm not saying anything until there's a formal statement put out by the company. The facts are straight and it is what it is. I think there's a lot of speculation around it. I don't think the optics look good at all. But until there's concrete statements and facts put out by the company, I don't have any comment on it, and I don't want to say something that could be potentially misconstrued or false.
Correct, and they're tight-lipped as well right now. But I just want people just to not freak out, and let's not just think that all doom and gloom is here. But at the end of the day, it's from an optics standpoint, it's not great, but we'll have more info. All right, sir. That's it for today. In the meantime, everybody, and thanks for checking in. Let us know your comments below, what you thought of the Steve Robinson interview along with Michael and some of the feedback he provided with PA. Any questions that we missed, let us know. Leave some comments below. We'll get back to both of them with some feedback and answer some of those questions that you may have. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. AV, good seeing you. Back here Wednesday at 4 o'clock. In the meantime, thanks for joining, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
So, what'd you think of all that information? Some interesting stuff that we just learned once again here at the TDR Traded Black podcast. Let's keep the conversation going. So leave your comments below. We'd love to get your feedback. As usual, if you have time, make sure to like, subscribe, and smash on that bell for all notifications. And stay connected with us here at the Trade to Black podcast. Thanks for watching, everyone.